This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. When it comes to savings, no amount is too small. Microsaving is a growing part of the international movement of microfinance. The aim is to bring financial services to poor people. Modern microfinance started with Nobel Peace Prizing economist Muhammad Yunus in Bangladesh. In the 1970s, he started small loan programs that would become the Grameen Bank. Currently, microcredit providers are in over 100 countries. Now, microfinance institutions are starting to offer other services, including savings plans. Recently, the nonprofit group Small Enterprise Education and Promotion held a conference in Washington. SEEP works with over 120 groups around the world in efforts to cut poverty. It does this by supporting small businesses. The goal is to help microfinance industry experts share ideas. One idea is called Financial Access at Birth, or FAB. It is designed to start each person with a financial citizenship at birth through a savings account connected to a bank deposit. Rosita Najmi is FAB's program director. She says FAB starts with financial inclusion, but creates other possibilities for inclusion across other sectors of health or education. Mobile or wireless technology will be important to many microfinance services. One meeting at the SEEP conference examined a mobile phone application for saving money. Debbie Dean of the Grameen Foundation says these efforts can also be extended to other financial services. They could include a combination of savings programs and money transfer programs. She says this could provide the most flexibility and convenience for savers. But offering savings, payments, and other services requires more training and controls. Rashid Bajwa leads Pakistan's largest microfinance organization. He says more training is needed. And he says microfinance institutions will need specialized people when they start offering savings programs. Small savings deposits add up, and interest over time makes them grow. This can have a surprising effect for savers and societies. Rashid Bajwa puts it this way. He says the amount of money that poor people have is imaginable. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Persutti.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. Microsoft has fought legal battles with officials in Europe and the United States over competition in the personal computer market. But at the end of March, Microsoft accused Google of being anti-competitive. A complaint to the European Commission accused Google of unfairly controlling the internet search market in Europe. Google was already talking to the Commission about the issue and said it was happy to explain to anyone how its business works. But Google also faced other issues. Gmail users in China began reporting problems with Google's email service in late February. The problems came as news of the revolutions in the Arab world filled the internet, and there were online calls for protests in China. Google said the government was interfering with its email service. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Jiang Yu called those accusations unacceptable. But Google spokeswoman Jessica Powell said, "This is a government blockage, carefully designed to look like the problem is with Gmail." Google is the world leader in internet search. But in China, the biggest search engine is Baidu. And in late March, China's largest internet media company, Sina, dropped Google's search engine from its website. Sina said it would use its own technology. An estimated 450 million Chinese are online, about half of all internet users in Asia. In 2010, Google said a cyber attack from China had attempted to get information from the Gmail accounts of human rights activists. Google also expressed concerns about censorship. So, Google relocated its Chinese search engine from the mainland to Hong Kong. In March, Google also faced new problems at home. A federal judge in New York ruled against its plan to put millions of books online. Google wants to create a digital library of all the world's books. It reached a $125 million deal in 2008 with groups representing writers and publishers. Google agreed to create a system to pay copyright holders when their works are used online. But Judge Denny Chin rejected the proposed settlement. He said it would give Google monopoly control of the book search market. But he left open the possibility for a new plan. On a similar issue, Baidu in China said it removed almost 3 million documents from its library. Writers have complained that Baidu did not have permission for their works to appear on its document sharing site. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. You can read and listen to our programs about business and other subjects at voaspecialenglish.com. And click on the classroom for interactive exercises for English learners.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report in Special English. Ethiopia is one of the last countries in Africa to permit mobile banking. Mobile banking has proved to be profitable in the developing world, where many people still do not use banks. Earlier this year, the World Bank reported that 75% of the world's poor are unbanked. That is about 2.5 billion people. Banking through mobile phones lets people take part in financial services even if they are not near a bank. Until recently, Ethiopia and Zimbabwe were the only nations in Africa without mobile money services. Now, that has changed for Ethiopia. Belcash and Mbir are mobile banking technology providers. They have been setting up mobile banking and mobile money services in Ethiopia for the past 3 years. The Dutch company Belcash is working in partnership with banks to provide easier access to financing through bank accounts. Ireland-based Mbir is a mobile money service that works with microfinance groups where no registration with a bank is needed. Ethiopia's mobile phone industry is young, and wireless service coverage in the country is not well developed. The pressure on the wireless network is expected to increase. In the past 4 years, the number of mobile users grew from 3 to 17 million. And Ethiopia's telecommunications provider, Ethio Telecom, expects that number to grow to 40 million in the next 3 years. The government closely controls Ethiopia's telecommunications market. That means there is only one provider. Competition is not permitted. The National Bank of Ethiopia recently finished a draft order on how mobile banking services should be structured. This comes as international companies have shown interest in starting mobile banking services. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. More than 50 countries and organizations have promised to give more than $5 billion to help Haiti rebuild after an earthquake destroyed much of the country in January. United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said the amount of money was greater than expected. Mr. Ban, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and Haitian President René Préval led a conference of donors at the UN March 31st. The Secretary General said nations and their international partners promised $5.3 billion for the next 2 years and almost $10 billion in total. The United States promised more than $1 billion. The European Union said it would give more than $1.5 billion. Mr. Ban urged the donors to carry out their promises. He said the donors must make sure Haiti gets the money it needs when it needs it. And they must guarantee that the money is well spent. The money will be used to meet emergency needs, such as water, food, and shelter for homeless people in Haiti. It will also be used to rebuild Haiti's infrastructure, its important systems and services. These include transportation and communication systems, water and power lines, and public institutions, including schools and hospitals. The money will also create new jobs and put the country on the road to sustainable development. It is expected to take 10 years and more than $11 billion to finish the job. Secretary Clinton said donors and the government of Haiti showed a new level of international support, coordination, and cooperation. Haitian President René Préval expressed his thanks and said the Haitian people and government would do their part to make the country's rebuilding a success. Haiti's government will have the major responsibility for supervising those plans. It will work closely with international partners, including the United Nations, the United States, and international financial organizations. The huge earthquake that struck Haiti killed more than 230,000 people. It left more than 1 million other people homeless in a nation where most citizens were already living in deep poverty. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report. You can comment on this story and other programs at voaspecialenglish.com.
I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Economics Report. Changes are taking place in Silicon Valley in California. Larry Page will replace Eric Schmidt as chief executive at Google. And Apple's chief, Steve Jobs, is taking another medical leave. 2 years ago, Mr. Jobs received a new liver. In 2004, he had pancreatic cancer. The latest announcement did not say how long he might be away or give a reason. Apple reported record-high earnings for the final 3 months of last year. But the health of Steve Jobs always brings questions about the future of the company. He helped start Apple Computer in 1976. Today, the company that played a big part in the personal computing revolution just calls itself Apple. Its products include the iPod and iPhone, and its latest success, the iPad tablet computer. Steve Jobs has long been Apple's public face, but some might forget that he left in 1985 to form a computer company called Next. Manuel Perez Quiñones is a computer science professor at Virginia Tech. He says Apple has led the development of some technologies, but that explains only part of its success. For example, he says many development tools associated today with Apple came from Next. Apple bought Next in 1996. Mr. Jobs rejoined Apple and became the permanent CEO in 2000. Last May, Apple passed Microsoft in market value and became the most valuable technology company in the world. Mr. Jobs says he will remain chief executive officer and stay involved in major decisions during his medical leave. But he put Tim Cook, his chief operating officer, in control of daily operations. As Steve Jobs steps back at Apple, Eric Schmidt is stepping down at Google. Mr. Schmidt plans to leave his CEO job in April after almost 10 years. He will remain on Google's board of directors. Larry Page was Google's founding CEO when he launched the company with Sergey Brin in 1998. But Mr. Schmidt has been the public face of Google, while Mr. Page has mainly worked on new products. Today, Google is the world leader in internet search and has products like the Android operating system for mobile devices. But Google is seen as trying to recapture the creative energy and speed of its early days. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. For more economic news, go to our website, voaspecialenglish.com. I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Economics Report. President Obama announced an agreement with congressional Republicans in December. It would extend for 2 years the tax cuts put in place by former President George W. Bush. The tax cuts were to end in January. The compromise extends current income tax rates for all Americans for 2 years. That includes rates for the richest Americans. The agreement also cuts workers' Social Security taxes by 2 percentage points. Social Security is retirement insurance paid by almost all American workers and employers. The so-called payroll tax holiday would save a family earning $50,000 about $1,000 a year. For the president, the most important part of the compromise was the extension of aid payments to unemployed Americans for 13 months. In November, the jobless rate increased by 0.2% to 9.8%. Economists say payments to unemployed people directly help the economy because they spend the money immediately. This has led some experts to call the agreement a stimulus measure meant to improve the economy. President Obama said he accepted the compromise because he wanted to help unemployed Americans. But the president faced strong opposition from his own party. Some Democrats objected to keeping tax cuts for the rich at a time when the government is struggling with deep budget deficits. The extension of the tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans is expected to cost about $80 billion over 2 years. The deal also includes tax cuts aimed at middle-income Americans and businesses. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said Republicans support the deal. He said it was an important step to take for the American people. Before the agreement, Senate Republicans had threatened to block other measures unless the tax cuts for the richest Americans were extended. Some Democrats were disappointed that President Obama agreed to the compromise. In 2008, he campaigned on the promise that he would continue tax cuts for the middle class. But he proposed to raise income taxes on families reporting $250,000 or more in taxable income. Later in December, both houses of Congress passed the tax bill, and President Obama signed it into law. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. In early January, President Obama appointed Richard Cordray as director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. This new government agency says it has already made home loans and credit card agreements easier for Americans to understand. But the Obama administration said the Bureau cannot supervise financial products like home loans without a director. The president used a measure known as a recess appointment to fill the position. He nominated Mr. Cordray last July, but the opposition Republican Party blocked a vote in the full Senate. Mr. Obama announced the appointment during a visit to Ohio. It was his first political campaign trip of the year. He told the crowd that the severe economic crisis 3 years ago did not happen because of too many financial rules. Mr. Obama said, "Does anyone think the reason why we got into such a financial mess, the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, the worst economic crisis in a generation, that the reason was because of too much oversight of the financial industry? Of course not. We shouldn't be weakening oversight. We shouldn't be weakening accountability. We should be strengthening it." Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell criticized the president's appointment. Many Republicans oppose the new agency, saying its goals are not clear. They also want a group of people to lead the agency instead of a single director. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau resulted from the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act of 2010. Its goal is to make the market for financial products safer. Educating Americans about investment and loan products, enforcing financial laws, and studying financial information are all part of its duties. The agency's budget is expected to be around $500 million. Richard Cordray served as Ohio's Attorney General for 2 years. He has earned praise for bringing legal action against banks and financial companies accused of harming homeowners and borrowers. Mr. Cordray launched cases against Bank of America and insurer AIG. His recess appointment is effective only until the end of the Senate's current term. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. For more business news, go to voaspecialenglish.com, where you can download MP3s and texts of our programs, read, listen, and learn English, and much more. Click on the classroom for learning activities and interactive features. And join us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at VOA Learning English. This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. In early April, President Obama announced his plans to seek re-election in November of next year. In an email to supporters, Mr. Obama said, "The race may not reach full speed for a year or more." But he said the work of building the campaign must start today. Some of that work will depend on how many jobs are created in the months ahead. Mr. Obama welcomed a report that the United States economy added 216,000 jobs in March. The unemployment rate dropped 0.1% for the second straight month. The unemployment rate edged down to 8.8%, the lowest in 2 years. And some economists say this spring may be the start of better news to come. Consumer spending has been increasing. Stephen Hess is a political scientist who studies the presidency at the Brookings Institution in Washington. He says the next election will more than anything else depend on employment in the United States. Labor Secretary Hilda Solis pointed out that the economy has added jobs for 12 months in a row. She says the economy has added 1.5 million private sector jobs. But, she added, we need to continue to not lose sight of where we need to go to increase opportunities for people to get employed in new jobs. President Obama has filled a top job in his party as he prepares to seek a second term. He chose Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz of Florida to head the Democratic National Committee. She replaces Tim Kaine, who plans to run for the Senate from Virginia next year. Among Republicans, former Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty recently formed a committee to explore a presidential campaign. Several other Republicans are also considering races for their party's nomination. The latest jobs report showed that 13.5 million Americans remained unemployed in March. Another concern is that oil prices remained over $100 a barrel. High energy prices could threaten the recovery from the recession. In another development, Portugal became the latest member of the European Union with heavy debts to request emergency loans. Portugal joined Greece and Ireland, which have also received aid. Portuguese opposition parties refused to accept budget cuts proposed by Prime Minister José Socrates. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. For more ways to learn American English and stay informed every day, go to voaspecialenglish.com from your computer or mobile device.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. The International Monetary Fund has raised its prediction for world economic growth to 4.6% this year. That is a half percentage point higher than the estimate in April. The IMF credited expansion in Asia and growing demand in the United States. But the lender's chief economist also warned that downside risks have risen sharply. President Obama talked about the importance of building exports as a way to create jobs and economic growth at home. He said, American exports grew almost 17% over the first 4 months of this year, compared to the same period last year. Part of this, of course, is due to the global recovery. But we are also moving forward on improving conditions for America's exporters. Mr. Obama relaunched the President's Export Council. The group includes business and labor leaders who will advise on trade issues. The government reported that private employers added only 83,000 jobs in June. Unemployment remains high even after 6 months of job growth. As the president pointed out, there are still 5 unemployed workers for each job opening. Export-related jobs, he said, pay 15% more than average. In 2008, American exports supported almost 7% of all jobs, including 1/3 of jobs in manufacturing. In January, in his State of the Union speech, President Obama promised to double exports in 5 years. In his comments in July, he said the United States must work to remove trade barriers and open new markets. Mr. Obama said the United States offers some of the world's lowest barriers to trade and expects free and fair access to other countries in return. In late June, the World Trade Organization ruled that Airbus received billions in illegal European aid. The ruling was a victory for its American competitor, Boeing. American lawmakers have also long complained that China suppresses the value of the yuan to lower the price of its exports. China recently promised to let the yuan trade more freely against the dollar. China passed Germany to become the world's top exporting country last year. The United States was third. Some American companies have been doing well in developing markets. For the first time, General Motors announced higher sales in China, the world's largest car market, than in the United States. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report. This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. President Obama has been seeking support for his $447 billion jobs plan. The American Jobs Act calls for cutting wage taxes on most businesses. It seeks to prevent public employees like teachers, police, and firefighters from losing their jobs to budget-cutting measures. And it calls for more federal spending on roads and transportation infrastructure to help create jobs. In October, the Senate blocked a vote on the full bill. President Obama said he would seek votes on different parts of his jobs plan. Mr. Obama and his wife, Michelle, traveled to North Carolina and Virginia as part of efforts to seek support for his jobs plan. The Republican majority leader in the House of Representatives said some parts of the bill are like those in a plan put forward by the Republicans. Eric Cantor urged President Obama to find common ground with House Republicans. We want the president to work with us. We want him to stop campaigning. Let's go find the things that are in common between this plan and his. Republicans in Congress offered their own plans to improve job growth earlier in the year. They have called for cutting tax rates and limiting government rules on businesses. Also, in October, Congress passed free trade deals with South Korea, Colombia, and Panama, and the president signed them into law. Both Mr. Obama and congressional Republicans agree the deals should create jobs at home and open markets to American exports. United States trade officials say every additional $1 billion in new exports supports 6,000 additional jobs. Last year, exports to South Korea alone stood at about $39 billion. But the president says a lack of jobs continues to hurt economic growth. The unemployment rate held at 9.1% in September. The economy added over 100,000 jobs during the month. But economists say that is not enough to markedly bring down the jobless rate. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. Our programs are a way for people to read, listen to, and learn American English and much more. You can download transcripts and MP3s of our stories at voaspecialenglish.com. You can also join us on Facebook and Twitter at VOA Learning English.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. Student loans and the interest that millions of Americans pay on them have been getting a lot of attention recently. Americans now owe more on student loans than on credit cards. Interest rates for direct, subsidized student loans could double to almost 7% on July 1st. 5 years ago, Congress lowered the rates for these government loans, but that law is set to expire. The president has called for keeping the current 3.4% rate. The administration says more than 7 million students will be affected without an extension of that lower rate. The government says the average cost of attending a public college was almost $13,000 in 2010. The total for private schools was over $32,000. Americans owed $845 billion in student loans in 2011. Some reports say the amount is now near $1 trillion. President Obama has recently given speeches on several college campuses. He said when he and his wife Michelle graduated from college and law school, they had a mountain of debt. He told students that college tuition and fees have more than doubled since most of them were born. He noted that the average student who borrows to pay for college now graduates with about $25,000 in student loan debt. An extension of the lower rate could cost the government $6 billion. Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney supports an extension. Republican leaders in the House of Representatives say they like the program, but they want to pay for it with money from the new health care law. Democrats have proposed other ways to pay for it, such as ending tax breaks for oil and natural gas companies. The website edupass.org says most loans, grants, and scholarships from public and private sources in the United States are restricted to American citizens. American schools that provide aid to international students are more likely to provide it to graduate students than to undergraduates. Some students are supported by their home university or government. A small number receive support from the United States government. Employers, private sponsors, and international organizations also help some students pay for school. Edupass.org has listings of colleges and universities that offer financial aid to foreign students. Another helpful site about American higher education and financial aid is educationusa.state.gov. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. President Obama is proposing rules to limit the size of big banks and the risks they can take. He wants to prevent banks from using government-insured deposits to make risky investments. He also wants to keep them from owning hedge funds or private equity funds. Banks took big losses as they traded mortgage-backed securities that went bad. That helped create the financial crisis. Bank shares fell after the president's announcement in January. His earlier efforts at financial reform have faced strong opposition from financial companies and some members of Congress. In the Senate, 60 votes are needed to prevent unlimited debate on a bill. But the Democrats lost their 60th vote. In January, voters in Massachusetts elected a Republican to finish the term of Ted Kennedy, who died in August. Scott Brown opposes the health care legislation in Congress. His election could also affect other areas, like climate change legislation and reforms in the financial system. A separate development in January could affect future elections. The United States Supreme Court cleared the way for unlimited spending by businesses and labor unions in political campaigns. The court voted 5-4 to end a ban on the use of corporate money to pay for independent campaign ads for or against candidates. The court said the restriction on political speech violated the free speech rights guaranteed by the Constitution. But President Obama said the decision will reduce the influence of average Americans. He called it a major victory for powerful interests like big oil companies, Wall Street banks, and health insurance companies. He directed his administration to talk with congressional leaders from both parties to develop a forceful response. Elections for Congress are this November. The next presidential election is in 2012. January 20th marked Barack Obama's first anniversary in office, but the Republican victory in liberal Massachusetts was seen in large part as a sign of voter anger across the country about the economy. Unemployment has doubled in 2 years to 10%. Many people are angry that they struggle while the government rescued big banks. Some banks took losses last year, but others earned record profits. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report.
I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Economics Report. In September, President Obama proposed new measures to lift the economy. The central bank, in its latest report, said there was continued growth in the past several weeks, but with widespread signs of slowing. Congressional elections are November 2nd. One new survey showed that 49% of likely voters think Republicans should control Congress. Other polls find that about 60% of Americans think the country is going in the wrong direction. President Obama gave a speech near Cleveland, Ohio. He proposed a tax plan for businesses that make capital improvements, like buying new equipment. The president said, "And I'm proposing that all American businesses should be allowed to write off all the investment they do in 2011. He said this will help small businesses upgrade their plants and equipment and will encourage large corporations to start putting their profits to work. Mr. Obama also proposed to permanently extend a tax credit for research and development. And he offered a plan for rebuilding and modernizing America's roads, rails, and runways. He said it would create jobs and improve transportation. The plan would cost $50 billion, but he promised it would not add to the budget deficit over time. The president spoke in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Both speeches were in the Midwest, an area hit hard by the recession. He said almost every Republican in Congress is saying no to his ideas. But retiring Senator George Voinovich of Ohio told the Washington Post that he planned to help push a bill through the Senate. That bill, supported by the president, contains measures to help small businesses. Still, there is disagreement over the future of the tax cuts approved under President George W. Bush. These are set to end this December. President Obama wants to extend the tax cuts only for families that earn less than $250,000 a year. Republicans oppose ending the tax cuts for higher earners. They say it would hurt small businesses. Democrats argue that few small businesses earn enough for their taxes to go up. Congress passed a big stimulus bill shortly after the president took office last year. But there is
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. In early July, an oil pipeline broke under the Yellowstone River in the western state of Montana. The Yellowstone is America's longest undammed river. The spill happened downstream from Yellowstone National Park. The burst pipe spilled as much as 1,000 barrels of crude oil, more than 160,000 liters, into the river. Workers shut off the ExxonMobil pipeline, and the company continued to clean up the spill. But the river was at flood levels and flowing quickly, carrying oil downstream into wetlands, fields, and yards. ExxonMobil spokeswoman Claire Hassett said local officials had ordered a temporary shutdown of the pipeline in May to check on its condition. They were concerned with heavy rains and rising waters. But she said, "We determined that it was safe to operate and we don't know what has caused this leak." Susan Casey Lefkowitz is with the Natural Resources Defense Council, an environmental group. She says the spill shows the dangers of mixing pipelines and waterways, especially when they are running under some of the most precious river systems that are important not just for wildlife, but also for our communities. The Yellowstone River is critical for irrigation, for example, and so it serves the needs of a lot of farmers and communities along its path. Andy Black heads the Association of Oil Pipelines, an industry group whose members include pipeline owners and operators. He says, "We have processes both within companies and at the associations to share learning and best practices and pursue the goal, which is zero accidents." Mr. Black says the industry does not need more federal and state rules. The regulations cover the major causes of pipeline failures, and we do not see any gaps. Susan Casey Lefkowitz disagrees. One concern, she says, is the future of the Ogallala Aquifer, a major source of water for America's Central Plains. A proposed pipeline called Keystone XL would cross the Ogallala to carry oil produced from tar sands in Canada for processing in Texas. Ms. Casey Lefkowitz says, ironically, it would actually cross the Yellowstone River, where the spill just happened. For VOA Special English, I'm Mario Ritter. For more programs and activities for learning English, go to voaspecialenglish.com.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. BP is one of the world's largest energy companies. It reported a profit of about $6 billion in the first 3 months of this year. That was more than double compared to a year ago. Now, BP faces growing political pressure over the worst oil spill in American history. Oil has been flowing from its damaged well in the Gulf of Mexico since April. But the company, formerly called British Petroleum, also faces growing financial pressure. Investors fear the long-term costs for cleanup, recovery, and fines. BP's market value fell more than $60 billion as its share price fell by as much as a third. On June 3rd, BP was finally able to cut a damaged pipe at the well using robotic vehicles. The cut was not exactly as hoped, but it was progress. Crews then turned to placing a cap over the pipe, not to stop it, but to direct at least some of the oil to ships on the surface. The leak is about 1,500 meters under the sea. Yet it may not be fully controlled before August. Workers are drilling 2 relief wells in an effort to ease pressure on the damaged well. President Obama returned to the Gulf for his 3rd visit since the disaster began. The Deepwater Horizon, an oil and gas drilling rig, exploded on April 20th. In June, Attorney General Eric Holder announced criminal as well as civil investigations. He said, "The Department of Justice will ensure the American people do not foot the bill for this disaster and that our laws will be enforced as much as possible." By some estimates, the cost of the cleanup could reach $37 billion. The owner of the rig, the Swiss company Transocean, has asked to have its responsibility limited to $27 million. The request is based on a law from 1851, but the Justice Department says that is not enough. The government could also use violations of other federal laws, such as the Clean Water Act, to collect money for the spill. Oil has already reached more than 100 kilometers of coastline in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, and it threatens the west coast of Florida. Areas of the Gulf have been closed to fishing, but job losses in the fishing industry are not the only worry. The Atlantic hurricane season officially began June 1st. Some people worry that officials could take their land if it becomes polluted by oil in a storm. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report.